Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be jumping back into the adventures of Chapel and Die Hard with Youngblood Strikefile number 3. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in September of 1993, we can see here another Jay Lee cover featuring Chapel front and center. Not a whole lot going on in the background, and of course he's once again carrying his trademark knife-like piece of metal because it's never the same knife twice and it very rarely makes sense. And while this isn't a bad cover, I actually do find it to be the weakest cover we've seen so far. I very much liked the covers that he drew for issues number 1 and 2 a lot better than this one, and feel like this one's just sort of lacking in a way. Creator, story, Rob Liefeld. Pencils, inks, Jay Lee. Script, Eric Stevenson. Color design and separations, Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. Lettering, Kurt Hathaway. Editor, Eric Stevenson. Film output, Kello Graphics. The story starts out in the past, and we see Chapel strapped into some kind of over-the-top sci-fi chair thing with all kinds of wires and electrodes hooked up to it. And I actually think this looks really cool. It very much fits the aesthetic of what's going on here. Chapel is actually in a lab where he is about to receive an injection from the scientists who work under the direction of Jason Wynn. Chapel's actually in quite the hurry as he wants to get this injection in immediately and has other things to do. But he's also very happy to get it. These injections apparently are souping up his body in ways that he never thought possible, essentially turning him into the most incredible, perfect version of himself physically. As we can see, he is in incredible shape, but it also seems to help him out in terms of his dexterity and reaction time as well. The scientists tell him to be patient as these things take time, and they want to make sure they get it right, and that they are in fact working to make Chapel the best he can possibly be, and that he needs to be, willing to accept the fact that this means that they have to be very careful and take their time. Chapel, however, doesn't want to hear any of it, and he states, "Come on, just give me the injection so I can get out of here." So the doctor happily obliges and injects Chapel with this substance. After Chapel receives his injection, the doctor tells him that he's all done and to make sure that he keeps coming back weekly to receive these injections. Chapel happily obliges and says, "Don't worry, Doc, I'll be back every single week for these things. As long as the stuff that you're pumping me full of keeps giving me these results, I'd be a fool not to come back." As he walks out of the lab, he encounters Al Simmons in the hallway. He asks Al what he's doing here, and Al states that he's waiting for him. Chapel says, "Oh, you're not here to get some of these injections?" And Al says, "Are you kidding? There's no way I'd allow them to inject me with that stuff." I'd also like to point out, while I have been critical on the past 2 issues of Jay Lee not really drawing a lot of backgrounds, and I even had one viewer who left a comment on my video for issue number 2 stating that, not every single panel needs a background. And I do agree with that statement. Action panels typically don't need them as much as just humdrum panels, but panels where nothing is really going on, such as these, it's literally just people talking to each other, benefit from them in a much greater way. Todd McFarlane once said in an interview that one of the most important skills a comic book artist can have is to figure out a way to make boring panels look visually interesting. And I'd like to point out, because this is kind of like exactly what I believe he's getting at, and it's definitely what I feel is a perfect example of the criticism I have. This panel over here is literally just Chapel and the doctor's faces with a blue background and just kind of some ink blotches. Meanwhile, when you move over here, this panel right up here at the top is basically the same thing in terms of color. Blue monochrome background with heavy black. But look at what Jay Lee did here. Right here in the middle, he made the heavy black come down and drew a line right here and made this part of or this blue right here darker than this blue over here, giving the illusion of a room, or at least the depiction of a room, where we get a ceiling and two walls. He didn't do anything different in terms of coloration, but it definitely adds to the idea of all of these characters existing within a room. And this panel right here, as a transitional panel, where we see Chapel walking down a staircase from this lab, kind of looking, very clean and futuristic with this lighting and this cool little, just, I guess, zigzaggy type of edge that creates a wall or hallway type of illusion. Even though there's, no coloring on the outside that's white, this still looks fantastic. And then when we get down here, where this would otherwise just be a scene of two people standing, he's added a fully drawn out hallway to illustrate exactly where they are, but also to give a little bit more depth to this panel. None of these things are super detailed, mind you, but they all work perfectly, especially the way that he did a vanishing point on this hallway. This looks really good. And that's really, I believe, all that Jay Lee really needs to do in a lot of these panels to just kind of give them that extra little, something to make them just pop a little bit more. And I believe he succeeded fantastically on this page right here. Al then tells Chapel that he and Wanda are still trying to have a baby, and in that circumstance, he's not going to let Jason Wynn just inject him with some kind of mystery chemical. Chapel actually concurs here at this point, stating, yeah, I'm not really sure what's in these injections, but as long as they keep producing these results, I really could care less. I mean, have you ever seen a more perfect specimen? And Al jokingly states, yeah, every time I look in the mirror. But then he also says, hey, Bruce, which, by the way, we find out that Chapel's actual name in this comic book is Bruce Stinson. I don't know if that was ever stated before this issue of Youngblood Strikefile, or if it was stated later on, but I'll be honest, as I've never read Strikefile before making these videos, I had no idea. I've been reading Image Comics for as long as I can go back, like 20 plus years, and have been reading, Youngblood and Spawn and all this stuff, and I never once realized that Chapel's real name was Bruce Stinson. But back to the story, Al says, Bruce, but seriously, have you ever actually asked Jason exactly what's in these injections? And Chapel replies stating, no, I haven't, and honestly, I don't care. There's no way that Jason's going to do anything to harm us, as we're basically his golden gooses. But Al's not so convinced, as he states, I think something's up with Wynn, and honestly, he hasn't really been the same since he had us take out Duke. This, of course, refers to when Al killed a fellow operative on a mission in the first issue of Strikefile. Moving back towards the present, we see that Chapel is gearing up as he states to himself, yeah, you had me fooled real good back then, didn't you, Wynn? As he starts putting on his shirt and loading up all of his gear, stating that by the time I'm done with you tonight, you're going to be begging me for forgiveness, but I'm not going to be in any kind of forgiving mood. Now, back to the whole backgrounds thing I was talking about. Notice none of these panels really have one. However, because Jay Lee established the hallway that these two were having this conversation in on the previous page, it's really not necessary. And over here, two of the panels are extreme close-ups of Chapel, so you don't really need it. This one where he's putting on his shirt is, essentially getting the point across. And we see here him standing over a table with a bunch of weapons, with some shade line right here in the middle, kind of showing that there are different light sources. And it does a really good job of, showing that Chapel is in some sort of bunker or hideout that he has and is preparing for an assault on Jason Wynn's compound. And again, this is kind of what I'm talking about, where if you don't have backgrounds, it's not always a bad thing. You just have to be very particular about the way you do it. And I feel like Jay is really kind of nailing it in this issue. An hour later, we are outside of Wynn's estate in McLean, Virginia. We see that Chapel cuts the power to the electric fence, hops over it, immediately kills all of Jason Wynn's dogs, bursts through a door or a wall, looks at the schematics to Wynn's home, which he got somehow, although I do like the idea of him standing in this atrium. Again, cool little, very simple background that Jay Lee drew, but very effective. We then see Chapel burst through the door of Wynn's office, where Wynn is already waiting for him. As he states, "It's about time you showed up. I expected you to be here hours ago. You didn't really think that that meeting you had with Geiger would go unnoticed by me. I always keep tabs on important people to me, Chapel." Now, of course, this is a bluff on Wynn's part. We already know that he's the one who set up the meeting between Geiger and Chapel, but he needs to play his hand close to the vest, and he wants Chapel to think that he has eyes and ears everywhere, even if he doesn't. Chapel then states, "So I guess you already know that I'm here to kill you." And Wynn says, "Yeah, I know, and I'm okay with that, but before you do that, I should probably point something out to you. You never really knew exactly what was in all those injections you were getting back in the day before with the agency, did you?" And Chapel states, "What are you talking about?" And Wynn goes on to explain that, we were making you the most incredible version of yourself we could possibly make, a super soldier no less. You didn't really think we would do it without some kind of contingency plan in case you went rogue, did you? And Chapel states, "Yeah, that's what Bloodstrike is for." You can check out my video on issue number 1 of Bloodstrike if you like. Unfortunately, I only have that one. The short version of it is that I'm missing some comics that I need to be able to continue that series right now, and I'm searching for them as we speak every time I go to the comic book store, in fact, and every time I travel. But Bloodstrike is essentially the Black Ops version of Youngblood. They take care of the down and dirty missions that the government does not want Youngblood to get their hands dirty with. And one of those types of missions is if any operative of theirs ever goes rogue, Bloodstrike takes them out. And this can include members of Youngblood, such as Chapel. Wynn then laughs, stating that Chapel has no idea exactly what's going on. He then tells Chapel that the HIV virus was actually developed by the US government, and that they released it into the public as a means of population control. They also kept refining the virus in their laboratories to the point where they had a version of it that they could inject someone with and keep it dormant in their system until they activated it remotely. And he then explains that this is what they've done with Chapel. Chapel, however, is not buying it, as he states, "So you're telling me the government created AIDS, injected me with some kind of super version of it that they can activate remotely at will, and that now I'm going to die. Nice try, Wynn, but you're not Roger Stone, and I'm not buying this crap from you." However, Wynn states, "You don't have to believe it, Chapel. It doesn't make it any less true. It also is something that no one else would ever believe, no matter who you tell, and I'll deny everything. And given my status versus yours, no one's going to believe you over my word, and you're basically screwed at this point." He then tells Chapel that he's already informed Youngblood of his illness, and that should he return to the Youngblood headquarters, he'll be immediately discharged due to his HIV positive status. He then leans over and tells Chapel that, he's basically screwed at this point. There's nothing he can do. No one's ever going to believe any of this happened, and that Wynn has already won, and that Chapel should just give up. However, Chapel is furious and states, "Yeah, well, maybe all that's true, but that doesn't stop me from killing you right now," as he points his gun at Wynn's head. Wynn then states, "Yes, you absolutely can. However, before you pull that trigger, there's one thing you should know. I have the cure." Realizing that he is defeated, Chapel lowers his gun and states, "What do you want, Wynn?" Wynn says, "Well, Chapel, you've reached the end of the line. You have nowhere to run and no one to turn to. And from now on, if you want to live, you work for me. So when you've decided that it's something that you want to deal with, you know where to reach me," as he hits a button and walks out of the office, leaving Chapel alone to sit with the realization that he now belongs to Jason Wynn. We then get an advertisement for Prophet. As I'm recording this video, I have not gotten into the Prophet ongoing series, but if you want to know more about Prophet's first appearance, you can check that out in my Youngblood playlist. We then reach the second story in the issue, featuring none other than Die Hard. And honestly, this is not a cover I'm super into either, as, yeah, it's fine. It's a picture of Die Hard. He looks cool and all battle damaged and whatnot. But again, that's kind of it. There's not a whole lot of other stuff going on, and I feel like the covers of the previous two issues were in fact better than this one. Creator, writer, penciler, Rob Liefeld. Inks, Danny Meeke. Color design and separations, Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics, Byron Tallman. Lettering, Kurt Hathaway. Editor, Eric Stevenson. Special thanks to Art Thibert and Norm Rapmond for inking assists. Film output, Keller Graphics. We see that the first page picks up exactly where the previous issue left off, as we see Super Patriot lifting a huge chunk of concrete above his head in an attempt to crush Die Hard under it. And Die Hard realizes that he's in a real bad situation, as so far he hasn't had much of an answer for the relentless assault of Super Patriot, and he believes that he might be facing an opponent that he's not able to beat. We then get a cool 2-page splash image where we see Die Hard's remote-controlled shield come in from behind at a speed of 70 miles an hour and strike Super Patriot in the lower back. Now, despite the fact that this would be enough to cut most people in half, it only slightly knocks Super Patriot off balance. However, this is the small opening that Die Hard needed to mount his counteroffensive, as he eyes up this moment as his time to bring the fight back to Super Patriot. On a second 2-page splash, we see that Die Hard launches himself into a huge uppercut that sends Super Patriot flying. He even thinks to himself that even though he's here to rescue Patriot, he has to subdue him first, and in order to do that, he has to be completely relentless in his attack. We then move on to a 2-page vertical splash, thanks a lot, Rob, where we see that Die Hard continues his relentless assault, not giving Super Patriot even a moment to catch his breath or mount any type of counteroffensive, as Die Hard thinks to himself that he does hate the fact that he's potentially injuring a former comrade, but he has to do this in order to bring him back alive and try and figure out exactly what's been done to him by Cyberdata. After several more blows, we see Super Patriot fly through the air and finally go down for the count. Realizing that he's unconscious, Die Hard quickly picks up his body and makes his escape from the Cyberdata facility in Pennsylvania, making his way back to the Youngblood headquarters to try and figure out what they can do for his former comrade. We're then teleported back to Washington, D.C. as we see Shaft and Die Hard accompany a suit from Washington who states, "Wow, that's a really incredible story of how you got Mr. Patriot, and we're working diligently to try and figure out exactly what's wrong with him." He then turns to them and says, "We're taking exceptional care of him." However, Shaft and Die Hard don't seem too certain about this, as we see them share a glance with each other. The man then states that upon realizing that they had lost the battle, he believes that Cyberdata purposely deactivated Super Patriot and kind of made an attempt to put them in a situation of, well, if we can't have him, nobody can. And now the government is doing all that they can to try and figure out how to reactivate him as they enter the facility where he's being held. We then reach another 2-page vertical, thanks Rob, where we see Super Patriot strung up with a bunch of wires and electrodes all hooked up to him. As the man states, "We're taking the best care we can of him, and we're going to definitely get him reactivated one way or another." However, Die Hard is not so certain about this, and he actually feels quite vulnerable looking at Super Patriot in this circumstance, as he realizes that this could just as easily be him up there, and how long is it going to be before his time comes? Die Hard then continues to wonder how long it's going to be before some suit in Washington decides it's time to pull the plug on him as well, when he's interrupted by none other than Glory. Glory states it's really difficult, isn't it, to look up there and face your own mortality, wondering when you might be next. She says that, I know for a fact John Armstrong, which is Super Patriot's real name, never thought he was ever going to be in this kind of a predicament. And she's then a little bit tentative as she tells Die Hard that the suits in Washington have told her that they're doing everything they can to help him, but she deep down doesn't really believe them. And Die Hard states, yes, I know, I have hope that one day we can fix all of this, but I have my doubts as well. And this is where the hard part comes in, the waiting, as the two of them walk away arm in arm. And this is what leads into the Super Patriot miniseries. And unfortunately, as I stated before, I had never read any of Youngblood Strikefile, so I was unaware that these first 3 issues were the precursor to the Super Patriot miniseries. And I made a video on Super Patriot miniseries number 1 before making these 3 videos. So if you've watched these 3 videos that I've been speed running through the last 3 months, and wonder to yourself why I was doing so, it's so that I could continue making videos about the Super Patriot miniseries with the necessary context to the backstory. And if you'd like to know more about all that, you can check out my video on Super Patriot miniseries number 1 and stay tuned for more videos on the rest of that miniseries. We then reach the Bloodlines letter section where readers could write in and talk to the creators of the comic book, ask them questions, and try and, get advice about things that they were trying to do in their own lives. And this one's actually several pages long, as you're going to see in a moment. There were 3 full pages of Bloodlines letters in this issue, and unfortunately, only 2 letters were really all that interesting. One person asked for an explanation as to how Riptide's powers worked, and the explanation that they give in the response is that her powers work by her ability to pull moisture out of her surroundings, including the air and the ground and whatever else might have any moisture molecules in it, to create the water attacks that she's able to produce. However, that explanation only makes it more implausible that she would have been on the mission in Youngblood number 0 in the desert, as there's basically almost no moisture whatsoever in the desert, meaning her powers would have been almost entirely ineffective and unusable. And another reader wrote in asking about why Die Hard carries his shield, as it's stated in the comics that his shield is made up of the exact same materials as his synthetic body. Meaning, if there's any attack coming at him that would damage his body, it would also go right through the shield as well, so the shield doesn't really offer any extra protection for him. However, the explanation that they're given in the response is that his shield is primarily an offensive weapon, which is the dumbest response ever. If the whole purpose of the shield is to be an offensive weapon, then why is it a shield in the first place? A shield is something you carry for defense, not offense. Even Captain America uses the shield for defense first and offense second. The fact that Die Hard's shield is supposed to be 90% offensive means that it shouldn't be a shield at all. It should be some other kind of weapon. It doesn't make any sense that they would do it that way. We then get an advertisement for Brigade number 0. As I stated before, I'm kind of between a rock and a hard place tracking down the issues of Brigade miniseries so that I can get into the ongoing series. But once I do, I will get into all of this, as I do have a copy of Brigade number 0 and quite a good bit of the ongoing series. But again, patience, please. I'm doing my best, but it's not as easy as I would have thought it was. Also, I thought I had all of those issues before I started, and I should have double checked. We then get an advertisement for Team Youngblood. Now, I do not currently have any videos on any issues of Team Youngblood on the channel. I am working on trying to get more of Team Youngblood. Right now, I only have a few issues of it, and I want to try and find the bulk of it before I start making videos about it. We then get a 2-page advertisement for Extreme, the 64-page quarterly featuring the talents of several of the creators that work for Extreme Studios. And I think I may have this. I'll have to check. I know I have at least an issue of Extreme. I don't know if it's this first issue. If it is, I'll probably make a video about it in the not too distant future, as I didn't realize it came up this early in the timeline of Image Comics, but it's kind of I've skimmed through it before. I've never actually like read it cover to cover. And it feels very similar to Darker Image, except all of the characters belong to Rob Liefeld and are part of the Extreme Studios branding. So it's just kind of an introduction to new ideas and new characters. And, I think just kind of a way to test the waters on what the response for all of these characters may be and if they should be part of the ongoing Extreme Studios storylines. And that was Youngblood Strikefile number 3. I liked this issue a lot. As I stated, I really liked what Jay Lee did with the artwork in his side of this issue. Just adding in that little bit of extra background detail, I feel like made all the difference in making his artwork really pop a lot more. If you compare this issue to the previous two, he's not doing that much more, but it really does feel like a ton, especially when compared to like issue number 1, where there was just almost nothing going on with the backgrounds. It was literally just color splash, ink blotch. And then we get to this issue where he's not drawing crazy detailed backgrounds, but all of his backgrounds, while being very minimalist, are also providing all of the necessary context that you need for the scene. It's really well done, and it works extremely well for his art style. Also, I like the conclusion of the Die Hard story, where we see how it was that Super Patriot was freed from cyber data, and also giving us the lead-in to the Super Patriot miniseries, as well as establishing what the connection between Die Hard, Glory, and Super Patriot was. I have no real complaints about this issue as a whole. It's overall really well done. It's a fun read, and I think they really kind of nailed it. But then again, these are just my opinions. You may have a completely different opinion. You might think that this issue was terrible and that Jay Lee should have stuck to the artwork he was doing before, and that this was a bad way to introduce Glory, and that it doesn't make sense that, Die Hard is the one that rescued Super Patriot from cyber data. But if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.